China is the world's most populous nation and is an economic and military giant, and this country is not known for always playing nice. Our guest today is Fergus Hodgson. He is the director of Econ Americas, a columnist with the Epoch Times, and also a research associate with the Frontier Center for Public Policy. Fergus recently wrote an article entitled "What Canada Can Do to Oppose Chinese Tyranny." You can actually see that article online at fcpp.org. Fergus, good to have you with us again. Let's begin with the ongoing court case of the U.S. wanting the extradition of Meng Wanzhou, of course a top Huawei executive, and of course China demanding that Canada just let her go. And China has retaliated by, sanctioning Canadian exports, has basically taken a couple of Canadians hostage. I mean, how should we be responding as a country to this? What are our options?
Thank you, Paul. This is such an important issue, and I'm glad to share it, to speak about it with you. And this case is ongoing, so it's been going actually for about 15 months, and it's still not resolved. So the Canadian courts are still working out whether to extradite this lady or to hand her over to the U.S. authorities. And what can Canada do? Basically, this is a lesson. This case is a small part of a broader problem that we're dealing with a totalitarian or dictatorial communist regime that is totally antithetical to Canadian values of liberal values of free speech, civil liberties. And so this requires a long-term reworking or reframing of all engagement with China, that you're not dealing with a friendly nation, you're dealing with a hostile enemy, basically. And they are using Canadian rule of law or Canadian good values to our own detriment, to be frank. We're showing goodwill and they're not repaying it. So while Canada is being extremely careful to have the rule of law, a precise decision, the Chinese, they've been holding two men hostage for 15 months, no court case at all. And so they have no moral standing at all. My basic premise is that, one, Canadians need to realize this is a hostile nation, and that if there's a decision to go between the Chinese favorite policies or between U.S. policies, Canada must side with the United States. It just so happens that the United States does have a president who is more aware or has heightened awareness of the China problem, and that is an opportune time for Canada to partner or side more closely with this. There's legislation already passed recognizing, let's say, the sovereignty or the autonomy of Hong Kong, for example. There are many ways Canada can sanction officials. I mean, there's a whole line. The basic problem is identifying that there is a problem, and then there are countless policies that stem from that, particularly with aligning with the United States in a battle of values.
And of course, the difficulty with actually responding that way with China, I mean, their trading power is enormous, that they have such influence on the world and on Canada. So our trade with China, that comes with strings attached, right? And you start talking about human rights abuses, you get a stern response, and trade sanctions the other way, which impact our people. I mean, recently, of course, we've seen the Hong Kong protests going on there, all the demonstrations, and, there's some speaking out against that, and they rebuked us fairly sternly on that too, right?
Paul, you're 100% correct, and I, just like you, I'm sure, I'm 100% in favor of free enterprise, right? I want people to be prosperous, to have their businesses grow. Only in extreme cases do I ever amend that. It just so happens that when you're dealing with a 100% anti-capitalist or crony capitalist nation, and they're trying to undermine your very foundations, you have to think twice about how you handle that. And none of us want to have a Canada being poorer. We shoot ourselves in the foot enough already. So there are many other ways to handle Canadian prosperity without resorting to one of the biggest ideological enemies of the West at this time. And so, I mean, if we want to discuss how to make Canada more prosperous, that's a different discussion, really, in my view. The fact is that we could remove all the barriers within Canada. We're talking about just trading between the provinces. That's a problem right now. And so there are countless ways, the equalization payment system, all these ways that are basically slowing down or constraining the Canadian economy. Yes, China is a massive nation. It has economic clout. That's a fact. There are many other alternatives to dealing with them, and my sense is too that they want Canada to be at the table. So we have to use what clout we have as well in partnership with the United States, which is a great deal of clout.
Right, and sometimes you just have to do the right thing despite the consequences, right? So another thing to
Exactly.
consider.
There are values that are Canadian, freedom of association, freedom of speech. There are many, gender equality, whatever you want to refer to. And we are dealing with a nation that has so many political prisoners, no one can keep track. It's the leader in the world for political imprisonment. They have organ harvesting, everything you can name. They favor abortion. These even forced abortions. They are so antithetical to Canada that, as you say, this is an ideological battle. This is a battle of values, and we should not forget that. The problem is that the Chinese, they're not foolish, right? They're playing the long game. They've been investing in that ideological battle as well, what they call a battle of soft power, and so they are investing in universities and publications. They are manipulating the way we engage with them and reframing the debate so that we don't think in terms of these liberal values that we should be when we approach the issues.
That's interesting. You mentioned universities. So you're suggesting that they're actually, in one sense, infiltrating our, secondary, post-secondary institutions with, I don't know, are they planting professors or students, that sort of thing, to influence people? How do they go about doing this?
There's so much going on, and I want to recommend a book. Actually, in addition to the Epoch Times, which I write for, there's another think tank, not the Frontier Center, one called the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and they're doing a lot of work on that. And they've published a great book, Claws of the Panda. I don't know if I can show that one up. The Claws of the Panda, and it is about Beijing's campaign of influence and intimidation in Canada. And so it documents in great detail what's going on. In terms of the universities, many ways. Of course, they do explicitly fund Confucius Institutes, which are these on-campus centers which promote the communist or regime-approved version of history and engagement. The Chinese will give scholarships both for their students and for foreign students to go to China. This engagement in an approved fashion. The students attending Canadian universities, not just Canadian, but New Zealand, Australian, American universities, many of them will be monitored and actually be spying on each other. It's very sinister. And in my view, it's beyond sinister. It's actually just pathetic, really. These people are bullies, and we should just call them out for that fact, that they're behaving like children, bullies who have no self-control, and they're tyrannical, and we're better than that. We're not going to stoop to their level. We will not allow that to happen in our countries, and we should not allow ourselves to become economically dependent on this nation, because that is what's happened. That so many universities in Canada and the United States now depend on immensely the Chinese tuition payments. So you go to many business schools here in the United States and Canada, the majority of the students will be from China. It's happening on a widespread basis. You even go to St. Mary's in Halifax, you'll see the business school there is heavily dependent on Chinese students.
That's very interesting. Yeah, thought-provoking for sure. Now, China has also been known to put pressure on Canadian politicians, especially those of Chinese descent. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, short of going to actual outright war, they will use anything, and actually there will be confrontations militarily as well, but they will basically block entry for politicians that go against the regime's wishes. And it is true that the prominent one in Canada is Richard Lee. He's a British Columbian Liberal Party member, and I think he was it the provincial legislature? I can't remember right now, but he was basically stopped at on entry into China, held, and then forced back to Canada.
That's because he spoke out against the regime, or?
He's been a longtime critic, yes, and it's so fascinating. I know many Chinese students. And some of them will even try to make the claim that there's no censorship in China, which is just such a laughable joke. That the problem is that in the communist mindset promotes this ends justifies the means thinking. And so they'll say, well, in order to protect our economy, we have to have the one-child policy, or in order to promote stability, we have to control speech, or whatever it may be. And they've reframed the thinking of people to be blind to the violations of their liberties.
Yeah, and again, that is very un-Canadian, frankly. You suggest that China even puts pressure on Canadian media personnel. That's very interesting.
Yes.
How do they go about doing that exactly?
You work in the media, and so it's very sensitive to us. We know how a thriving media is so crucial to a free society. And we also know that, particularly in this time of maybe transition in media away from conventional legacy outlets to new publications, there's a desperation for funding. And this is why there are all these bailouts coming from the federal government in Canada, which is really a disgrace in my mind to media that we are proud, independent people, and we want to speak our mind. We don't want to be dependent on handouts. And also, I'm such a big believer in alternative media like your own channel that provides what people really want. Anyway, so the Chinese regime has many ways to infiltrate and manipulate the media. They will fund publications, they'll fund PR firms, they'll place op-eds, they'll use their leverage to get certain writers or journalists fired. And this happened, it creates a situation of self-censorship where journalists, they know to toe the party line and just not create problems, lest they be cast aside. And you know this too, that many journalists are not well off. They struggle financially. It's not necessarily a well-compensated profession. And so they do what they need to stay afloat. And so that's why, again, I really favor independent media. And I do not want the Chinese and to be involved in this. But the truth is a broader understanding that media can be manipulated. And particularly in an era where there are fewer and fewer people paying the actual subscriptions and advertisers paying publications or outlets, there's more money being inserted to manipulate the editorial line.
Now, should Canada allow Canadian telecommunications companies, now this is a whole nother ballgame here, isn't it, to use Huawei technology to build the new 5G network? I know recently the U.S. has said it's such a security risk that they'll stop sharing intelligence with Canada. I mean, that's a serious thing.
The fact is, Huawei is a crony capitalist or a communist party front company, and it has arisen because of preferential treatment from the Chinese regime. It is a company, but it is also a tool of the regime. So the fact is, it has to be stopped. They are using it as a vehicle to engage with Canada and other countries around the world. And from memory, the Australians have also rejected Huawei's involvement for that very reason. They realize that communications infrastructure is so crucial to national security and the free society that they do not want an antithetical nation involved. They don't want them to have power over that. And right now, during this coronavirus scenario, we can see exactly the problem because no one knows what is going on, because the Chinese have kicked out journalists from all sorts of prominent publications, just kicked them out of the country. That's how much they care about free speech. And they will manipulate the line as they see fit. We don't want to give them more power to make that worse beyond their own borders.
Yeah. I can't see that being a good thing, to allow a Chinese company that seems to be, connected to the government of China to be involved in our crucial infrastructure that way. That does have very serious security risks to it. So I'm just encouraging our viewers to really talk to our government about that. That's a serious thing. You mentioned earlier too, we need to reduce our economic dependence on China. So true. And so by doing so, of course, that will, in the short term, for sure, impact producers here. And that means we need to find some new markets. I know there's been talk about maybe, expanding to Japan or South Korea and so forth. You mentioned as well maybe getting some oil pipelines completed. So hopefully that'll be happening over the next while here. And we look at this whole, COVID-19 pandemic, most likely started in a Chinese wet market, people say, experts say. So, your thoughts on Canada and maybe the world, pressuring China to stop allowing this from happening again. How can we, maybe as the West, I guess, put some sort of pressure on China to change their direction here?
That's a really great question. And of course, I would love to see China change direction, right? This issue of this wet market and the coronavirus, or the CCP virus, whatever you want to call it, it's a symptom of a much deeper problem. First, I have zero confidence that the Chinese will respect any kind of agreement to stop these wet markets or to change in a way that would make this not happen again. The real long-term pressure would have to be with going with many of the friendly nations. So whether it's South Korea or Japan or Singapore, whatever it may be, other nations that are much more pro laissez-faire capitalism or the West. And alone, those nations are not as large or as influential as China, but together they are. And so we just have to make a long-term, I guess, geostrategic priority of going with nations that side with us and not falling to the trap of an early carrot for a long-term stick. And so, yes, in the long run, my own view is that really this regime has to undergo fundamental reforms. Whether Canada has the clout to make that happen or not, I mean, that's doubtful. What we can do is preserve Canada herself and not fall prey to this predatory regime.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I'm running out of time here, but Fergus, you make a good point that we can't do it alone, but together with allies like the U.S. or the U.K. You mentioned Australia. Banding together, we need not to, I guess, cower in fear and say we can't do anything. We can do something, and we need to tell our government to do so. All right, thank you so much, Fergus. I much appreciate your time here today.
Thank you, Paul. It's my privilege. Okay.
You bet. Fergus Hodgson is the Director of Econ Americas.